All right, so before you get set up trying to synthesize a sound, if you've done everything that we've talked about so far, when you're going to go ahead and analyze the sound, we're just going to do a real basic analysis. So I mean, this might be simple beyond comprehension, because for different sounds, the more complex the sound, the more analysis you're going to have to do and the more work you're going to have to do, correct? I mean, that's pretty simple understanding. But how to go about it. You need to set yourself up some kind of program to where you're going, okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the waveform. And, so you want to look at what are the components of the waveform. And then you want to look at, what would be the ADSR on it. So go look at what the ADSR is on it. You want to look at maybe what the frequency content is on it, other than just the waveform, for EQ. Actually, I should step back a little bit. Let's just look at that as waveform, what the waveform might be. You want to go look and see if there's any modulations in frequency or modulations in volume, things like that. You want to look for noise, what kind of noise might be in there, and any other parameters that that are characteristics of that sound. That might be some types of distortion. It might be reverb. It might be delays. It might be all kinds of different aspects. So you really need to sit down and listen to that sound first of all, and really make some notes about what that sound all has in it as best as you can hear it. So with that in mind, that basically the best thing to do is, we've already talked about downloading some samples. Trying to make, so we've got some this is a violin, we're not getting into that too much, we've talked about that, but you've downloaded some samples of a sound you want, you've looked in your synthesizer at their presets that we talked about in the last video, see if you can find something close to it, and you can make a recording of it so you can have a sound file to analyze. And you've maybe made some sounds of it yourself with your voice, that you could put in a sampler and work on them also, and use for analysis. And you've got sonic visualizer, harmonic visualizer to really do some serious analysis. So I mean, the basic understanding is that at that point that you're basically looking at, first of all, you're looking at the waveform. So if you're looking, a simple thing is, my voice here, it's got this part that I did on my voice. Well, let's do that one's a little bit more complex. Let's just do this doorbell. So we're looking at that doorbell and we want to look at it. And what it's doing, ding dong, it's two parts, obviously. So we're looking at the frequency content. So we already know we can look at the frequency content in this and see real obviously that, it's not going to be real easy to put together. It's not like just a basic waveform. So we've got some work to do. And obviously, some wavetable, wave isn't going to work. So, we've got some work to do figuring out what these harmonics are, what their relation to are, what is the fundamental, and really looking into what the spectral content is, and looking at it also on the scope to have an understanding of what it looks like there. Does that make sense? Doing some one-shots of it, bing bong, and looking at what's going on it. Maybe pulling out a phase meter and looking at it on there also. But getting an understanding of the harmonic content of it and of the actual sound is probably one of the first things to understand, how complicated it's going to be and how complex. And the next thing, you're going to want to look at your ADSR, the attack, and you can see the attack on this, that it's fluctuating immediately. So it's real obvious that, that your ADSR or something like that might have to be hooked up to one of your LFOs to do some modulation, because it attacks immediately and it starts doing all this wavering stuff. But the attack is pretty rapid. You can tell real quick that the immediate attack is pretty rapid. The decay isn't much. You can see maybe this is the decay, but the attacks, it stays constant here before it starts to decay. And then as it goes down there, it hits another note. So now you've got a delayed effect. So this other note's actually going to be hit after the first note, but as part of the same sound. So you're going to have to create this sound and that sound that are obviously two different sounds, two different harmonic contents that are going to be on the same file. So you might have to cut this in half and analyze one at a time and then work on combining them. Does that make sense? And I know that sounds like a lot, but that's kind of what you got to do. And then what else do you got on there? You're trying to look for frequency modulations and you're looking for volume modulations. Everybody's seeing a little bit of modulation going on in here with the frequency. You're not seeing a whole lot of with a whole lot of frequency modulation. I mean, it's really obvious that there's not a whole lot of frequency modulation happening there, but there is some volume modulation. There's no doubt about it. And the distortion, you can see distortion down here. There, it comes on real quick and then it dies off real quick. So you can kind of see the distortion, and you can hear that it's got some reverb in it. That's pretty obvious. I mean, there is reverb in it. It doesn't seem like it has any panning effects or anything like that, or any other type of modulation things happening. There's obviously modulation a little bit in the ringing. You can hear it. It doesn't look real obvious on the spectroscope, but there is some in there. So, I mean, that's basically what you got to do, you know. And when we had talked about, you know, making your own sound up, that, you know, I've made up this sound that I went like this, and I just went, you know, so you know, it's on there, and you can actually, a sound like that, you know, you've got it in your head, and I know that's a silly one, but, you know, any kind of sound you might be thinking of, and then you start to analyze it. What's happening to it, you know? What was that sound doing, you know? And what parts of the things that I did with my voice aren't really parts that I want in that sound. It was this other part that I was really more interested. So, I mean, it's really, you know, that harmonic content. Now, is the harmonic content my voice sound right? Does it need to have added harmonic content? Does it need modulations, distortion, noise, LFOs? Does it need, you know, what kind of filtering, attack, decay, sustain, or release? How that might be different to work on the sound that I want to. And so, I mean, those kind of things are what you got to kind of look at. There's a lot of things that we did not address as far as, you know, analyzing the sound, but you'll understand the more complex the sound is, that, you know, you'll find out really simply that if you just, you know, press your triangle wave, you know, on your wavetable on your synth to make a recording of it, and then, you know, look at it on here, you know, that you're going to see that there's not a whole lot of, you know, you can look at all those things that we looked at on there, and you're going to find out the analysis isn't, you know, really complex, you know, and it's pretty simple to put together because it's very periodic, and, you know, it's very set and repetitive, and it's got a set structure to what it is rather than something that's a little more natural. Natural sounds are very hard to reproduce and take time. So, and you'll find that anything that's unnatural, that's very periodic, that even if it has a lot of stuff going on in there, that, you know, it's repetitive, and you'll be able to see it in the spectrum, you'll see it in the waveform, you'll see it, you know, it'll be very obvious. It'll be obvious on here on the wave file when you're looking at it, and in both of those things, and on the phase meter it'll look the same. I mean, you'll see the periodicity of it, and it makes it a lot easier to try to emulate or work with, or you know, try to figure out what was going on there to do some sculpting. So I hope that kind of opened up the door there, you know, but I really hope that you download Sonic Visualizer and just kind of take a look at it so that you can start looking at those kind of things. And, you know, these kind of things happen in here. Whenever you get a wave file like this violin, don't worry that it looks the same way to everybody, you know, unless they're basically really good at analysis, that they say the same thing you do, that it looks like a mess. How could I reproduce that on a synthesizer? I mean, they're going to obviously see the attack real easy. It's really hard to see that there's some kind of decay here because it drops down and then it goes back up again like it's another hit like on the doorbell, but we know that's not happening on that violin because it went da and it's holding that note. So all these modulations and fluctuations and all these, you know, quasi-periodic nature of this sound can be very frustrating if you're trying to repeat it. So or reproduce it or create it. So don't feel alone there. Everybody that's trying to reproduce violin sound feels the same way that you do, that it looks like it would be very difficult to do. And yes, it is very difficult to do. So that's a real tough one. So anytime you run into that stuff, you really need to make a decision on the parameters that you're seeing happening, how easily, you know, how much work it is going to be dissecting it and putting it back together, you know, to where it's something you can actually do and synthesize. And it's a really good idea to start with the basics, you know, really go down and break the sound down to as small a components as you can, and just build larger components to understand that waveform or to understand that sound and its actual components and its properties. And that's a huge thing to get through your head whenever you're doing and analyzing any type of a sound. And you'll find that simple sounds like this can be real easy. You know, you can, you know, that's like you can see the attack, you can start to see the decay, you can start to see the sustain, and then it's got this real slow release. And always remember that on some instruments, release will be when they stop hitting the sound and then it just dies off naturally. And sometimes releases that, you're getting lower in volume, that sometimes isn't looked at as release. So you kind of have to fudge that when you're dealing with your ADSR and stuff, because sometimes that's not real obvious and you might have to address that issue some other way, or you look at it like that so that it doesn't get confusing about, well, when is, I dropped down in volume, but then it released and there was this trail after it. That's the actual release, and the other stuff I was just dropping in volume. So, you have to approach that a little bit differently. Does that make sense? And that basically might work out to you working out, the length of the ADSR and things like that. So, I hope that kind of opened up the door to give you some understanding of what you should be looking for. And to start out with some real basic waveforms. Start out with real simple waveforms, the sinusoids, and adding, one or two harmonics to it and see what it's looking like. Add some modulation to them, add some noise to them. Add, some filters to it. Add some of the characters, some of those synths, modulation, and, all kinds of different things, basic waveforms from the wavetables, and see what they look like, and, render a couple of them down so you can analyze them. Do some things with your voice, render some off of the actual synths that you're working on to look at what it looks like, and try to analyze it in the tools that we've talked about to give you a little bit better idea of how you're going to go about analyzing it. And I understand in 15 minutes that you're probably not, able to analyze, audio, like some kind of guru at this point, but the basics you need to look for. So, even when you're talking about that, any type of, parameter that's going to be dealt with in synthesis is going to be a parameter in that sound. So you need to go look for that parameters and all the parameters we talked about to see if it's there in that sound, and how you're going to see it, and how you're going to reproduce it, how you're going to need to get set up to try to reproduce that sound by synthesizing it. So, I hope that was fairly clear, and I addressed that very concisely, so that basically it just kind of showed you that, some real simple ways to go start looking at those sounds. And I'd imagine that, as you get looking at more and more complex sounds, that, your analysis methods are going to get more and more complex. I know mine did. I was, when I was really, trying to study things like violins and a whole lot of other things that were going on, that I had, like 5, 6 different, analysis tools going at the same time, trying to figure out what the heck is going on with that modulation and that frequency modulation, or just that one part, and, sometimes that can get ridiculous. But if you're really into sculpting it and understand what's happening with it, so that you're, that's what you have to do. But simple synthesis sometimes can get frustrating, because people get a synthesizer and they start wanting to make all these sounds, and they don't realize how complex they are, and them just putting a button on the wavetable synthesizer just doesn't do it. And then they're like, well, this is now I don't even want to do that, because it can be very difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it is. But you'll see that when you get some synths and you start looking at some of the patches that they have on there in the presets, to really understand some of the things that are going on there, and then to look at what's doing that, and you can actually take and record some of them, look at what's happening, analyze them, unplug some of the things that are happening on those patches, and then record it again. What did that do to it? When I changed the ADSR, what did it look like here now? What did the sustain look like, the release, all aspects of it you can do that with to get a much better understanding. So, I hope that was very helpful in helping you understand, and I suggest you start out with basic things and then build yourself up. And then if you're analyzing sound, start looking for the basic components and small structures that make the larger complexities of the actual sound, at one step at a time, to analyze what's going on so you can try to reproduce it. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. In the next video, we're going to actually have the synthesizer out and try to combine a few things. I know it's been forever, but we're going to try. And so I hope you have some fun analyzing and use all the tools that we've talked about, and get a little bit better understanding what's going on there before you start synthesizing, to really help deal with your frustration and help the steps that you need to take to get yourself set up to start synthesizing, that you've got a pretty good understanding of what you need to do to get yourself set up to get done what you want to do. Peace, hope, love. See you in the next vid.